Commander Zethkar stood at attention outside the crystalline doors of the throne hall, his four arms crossed behind his back in perfect military posture. The massive Krillian warrior had served the Galactic Empire for over 3 decades, his purple scale hide bearing the scars of countless battles fought in defense of the realm. At 8 feet tall, with razor-sharp claws and eyes like burning emeralds, he was the embodiment of imperial might. The palace of Emperor Vaxthul stretched endlessly in all directions, a monument to the power that ruled over 47 star systems. Built from living crystal that pulsed with inner light, its spires reached toward the stars themselves. Within these halls, representatives from dozens of species bowed before the throne, seeking favor from the most powerful being in known space. Zethkar's duties as Royal Guard Captain were simple but absolute. Protect the Emperor, maintain order in the palace, and ensure no threat ever reached the inner sanctum. For 28 years, he had performed these duties flawlessly. He knew every corridor, every secret passage, every hidden chamber in the vast complex. Or so he had believed. The discovery began with routine maintenance reports. The palace's bioneural network, a living system that managed everything from lighting to life support, had been showing minor irregularities in Sector 7 of the lower levels. Nothing dangerous, just small energy fluctuations that the maintenance drones couldn't explain. As captain of the guard, Zethkar personally investigated all anomalies, no matter how small. Sector 7 housed storage facilities, archival chambers, and utility systems that kept the palace functioning. It was a place few visitors ever saw, buried deep beneath the ornate upper levels where diplomacy and ceremony took place. Zethkar had walked these corridors thousands of times, but today something felt different. The energy readings led him to a wall that looked exactly like every other wall in the sector. Smooth crystal panels that glowed with soft blue light, seamlessly joined together. But when he ran his scanner along the surface, it detected a hollow space behind the crystal. A space that didn't appear on any architectural plan he had access to. Zethkar's 4 hands moved over the wall with practiced efficiency, searching for hidden mechanisms or pressure points. The crystal felt solid under his claws, showing no sign of concealment. Yet his instruments insisted there was something beyond. After an hour of fruitless searching, he decided to consult the palace's central intelligence system. AI Core, this is Royal Guard Captain Zethkar. I require architectural analysis of Sector 7, level -12, Corridor 94. The response came immediately, spoken in the melodious voice that had guided the palace for centuries. Captain Zethkar, architectural analysis complete. No irregularities detected in specified location. Zethkar's eyes narrowed. AI Core, my instruments detect a hollow space behind the wall at coordinates 71294 Alpha. Explain this discrepancy. A pause that lasted exactly 3 seconds. For an AI that processed information faster than light, 3 seconds was an eternity. Captain Zethkar, no hollow spaces exist at those coordinates. Suggest recalibration of scanning equipment. Something cold settled in Zethkar's stomach. In 30 years of service, he had never known the AI core to lie or make errors. Yet here it was, directly contradicting evidence from multiple scanning devices. Either there was a catastrophic failure in the palace's most advanced systems, or someone had programmed the AI to conceal this space. Returning to his quarters, Zethkar retrieved his personal toolkit. Among its contents was a military-grade plasma cutter, designed to breach enemy fortifications. Using such a weapon within the palace was strictly forbidden without direct imperial authorization, but his duty as royal guard superseded normal regulations. If someone had created a hidden chamber and programmed the AI to hide it, the security implications were enormous. The plasma cutter made short work of the crystal wall. Behind it lay a corridor that Zethkar's scanner had detected, but it was far more extensive than his instruments had suggested. Emergency lighting flickered to life as he stepped inside, revealing a passageway that stretched far into the darkness. The architecture was different here, more utilitarian than the artistic designs that characterized the rest of the palace. As Zethkar advanced down the corridor, his warrior instincts screamed warnings. The air tasted wrong, carrying scents his enhanced senses couldn't identify. The walls bore no decorative elements, just smooth surfaces marked with symbols he didn't recognize. Most disturbing of all, his communication equipment couldn't reach the outside. Something in these walls was blocking all transmissions. The corridor branched several times, creating a maze-like network of passages. Zethkar marked each turn with scratches from his claws, ensuring he could find his way back. His scanner detected multiple chambers ahead, some small, others vast. Whatever this place was, it had been built on a scale that rivaled the main palace itself. The first chamber he entered took his breath away. Rows upon rows of crystalline tanks filled the space, each containing a floating humanoid form. The beings inside were unlike any species Zethkar had encountered in 3 decades of military service. They stood roughly 6 feet tall, with pale skin and strange symmetrical features. Dark hair floated around their heads like underwater plants, and their limbs were positioned as if they were merely sleeping. Zethkar approached one of the tanks with growing unease. A small display panel showed vital signs, brain activity, and other biological data. Whatever these creatures were, they were alive. The tank's label was written in characters he didn't recognize, but his universal translator provided a partial rendering. Subject 2847, Homo sapiens classification, primitive/terminated species. The words hit Zethkar like a physical blow. Homo sapiens. He had heard that designation before, in restricted military briefings about ancient history. These were humans, a species that had been declared extinct over 1,000 years ago. According to imperial records, humanity had been one of dozens of primitive civilizations eliminated during the Great Expansion, when the Empire had claimed their home systems. But if humans were extinct, what were thousands of them doing in hidden chambers beneath the Imperial Palace? Zethkar moved from tank to tank, his horror growing with each discovery. The humans showed signs of recent medical procedures. Surgical scars, injection sites, monitoring devices implanted beneath their skin. Someone had been experimenting on these beings, keeping them alive for purposes he couldn't imagine. The next chamber contained something even more disturbing. Laboratory equipment lined the walls, surrounding examination tables where human subjects lay unconscious. Monitoring devices tracked their vital signs, while automated systems performed various procedures. Blood samples, tissue biopsies, neural mapping. The humans were being systematically studied like laboratory animals. A massive holographic display dominated one wall, showing detailed analyses of human physiology, psychology, and capabilities. Zethkar's translator worked overtime to process the technical information, but several facts became clear. Humans possessed unusual genetic diversity compared to other species. Their psychological profiles showed remarkable adaptability and creativity. Most significantly, they demonstrated an almost supernatural ability to survive in hostile conditions. Zethkar read report after report detailing human performance in various scenarios. When placed in impossible situations, humans consistently found solutions that defied probability. When faced with overwhelming enemies, they developed tactics that superior species couldn't counter. When their survival was threatened, they displayed determination that bordered on insanity. One report particularly caught his attention. It described an experiment where humans had been placed in a simulation of their species' final battle during the Great Expansion. According to imperial history, humanity had fought to the last against impossible odds before finally succumbing to superior firepower. But in the simulation, when given access to modern technology and tactical information, the humans had found a way to win. The implications made Zethkar's blood run cold. If humans could defeat Imperial forces in simulation, what did that mean for the Empire that had supposedly destroyed them? And why were thousands of them being kept alive in secret laboratories beneath the Emperor's own palace? As Zethkar continued exploring the hidden complex, he discovered chamber after chamber of sleeping humans. Some appeared to be children, others elderly, but most were adults in their prime. The total number had to be in the tens of thousands. An entire population preserved in artificial slumber. The final chamber he entered that day contained the answers he dreaded to find. It was an office of sorts, filled with data terminals and holographic displays. The walls were covered with star charts showing human colonies throughout the galaxy. Colonies that, according to imperial records, had been destroyed centuries ago. Zethkar accessed the nearest terminal with his command codes. To his surprise, the system accepted his authorization without question. Files began appearing on the display, each one more shocking than the last. Operation Silent Dawn. Project Genesis Revival. The Human Asset Program. The files revealed a truth that shattered everything Zethkar thought he knew about the Empire. Humanity hadn't been destroyed during the Great Expansion. They had been captured, studied, and secretly deployed as the Empire's ultimate weapon. For over 1,000 years, modified humans had been used in the Empire's most dangerous military operations. Their natural adaptability and determination made them perfect soldiers for impossible missions. But the program had grown beyond military applications. Humans were being used as test subjects for new technologies, as unwilling participants in psychological experiments, and as genetic material for creating hybrid soldiers. The sleeping thousands in the chambers weren't just prisoners. They were a breeding population, maintained to ensure a steady supply of human subjects for Imperial research. Zethkar's claws scraped against the terminal as he read mission report after mission report. Humans have been deployed to suppress rebellions on dozens of worlds, their identities concealed to hide the Empire's use of supposedly extinct species. They had infiltrated enemy governments, assassinated troublesome leaders, and carried out operations too sensitive for regular Imperial forces. The most recent reports made his stomach turn. A new phase of the program was being implemented. Rather than just using humans as tools, Imperial scientists were working to create human-alien hybrids. The goal was to combine human adaptability with the physical advantages of other species, creating perfect soldiers that could be controlled absolutely. Among the test subjects were human children, raised from birth in Imperial laboratories with no knowledge of their true heritage. They believed themselves to be loyal citizens of the Empire, unaware that their entire species had been enslaved and exploited for generations. Zethkar's communicator suddenly crackled to life, startling him from his reading. "Captain Zethkar, report your location immediately." The voice belonged to General Thaxmore, his direct superior and one of the Empire's highest-ranking military officers. "Sir, I am investigating energy anomalies in Sector 7, as previously reported." "Negative, Captain. Energy readings show you are in an unauthorized area. Return to your post immediately." Zethkar looked around the chamber where thousands of years of Imperial deception lay exposed in digital files. "Sir, I have discovered significant security concerns that require immediate attention." "Captain Zethkar, you will return to your post immediately." "That is a direct order." The transmission cut off, leaving Zethkar alone with the weight of terrible knowledge. His duty as royal guard demanded that he protect the Emperor and maintain Imperial security. But how could he serve an empire built on the enslavement and exploitation of an entire species? How could he continue to enforce the will of rulers who had committed genocide while secretly preserving their victims for experimentation? His enhanced hearing detected movement in the corridors outside. Multiple sets of footsteps, the hum of energy weapons being charged, the whispered communications of soldiers moving into position. Someone had discovered his breach of the hidden chamber, and they were coming to ensure his silence. Zethkar quickly copied as many files as his personal storage device could hold, prioritizing the most damning evidence. If he was captured, at least some record of the truth might survive. The footsteps were getting closer now, accompanied by the distinctive whine of Imperial battle armor. "Royal Guard Captain Zethkar." A voice echoed through the chambers, artificially amplified and distorted. "You have accessed classified materials without authorization. Surrender immediately and submit to memory reconditioning. Compliance is mandatory." Memory reconditioning. They would erase everything he had learned, possibly alter his personality to ensure absolute loyalty. Zethkar had seen the procedure performed on prisoners and dissidents. The beings who emerged were hollow shells of their former selves, incapable of independent thought or moral judgment. He sealed the copied data in his armor's emergency compartment, designed to survive even if he didn't. Then, he drew his weapons and prepared to face whatever forces the Empire had sent to silence him. As a royal guard, he had sworn to die before abandoning his duty. But his duty wasn't to protect those who wore crowns. It was to protect what was right. The first soldiers appeared in the doorway, their weapons trained on him. Behind their visors, Zethkar could see faces he recognized. Fellow guards he had served with for years, soldiers who trusted him completely. They didn't know what they were protecting, didn't understand that they were helping to perpetuate one of history's greatest crimes. "Stand down, Captain," the lead soldier called out. "By order of Emperor Vaxthal, you are to surrender immediately." Zethkar raised his weapon, but didn't fire. Do you know what this place is, Sergeant Craven? Do you know what we've been protecting all these years? I know my duty, sir, just as you know yours. Our duty is to protect the innocent, Zethkar replied. But we've been protecting their tormentors. The chamber fell silent, except for the hum of life support systems keeping thousands of humans alive in their crystalline prisons. For a moment, Zethkar thought he might be able to convince his fellow soldiers to listen, to see the truth that surrounded them. Then, General Thaxmore's voice echoed through the chamber's communication system. All units, the captain has been compromised by enemy agents. He is no longer to be considered loyal to the Empire. Use any force necessary to neutralize the threat. The soldiers' weapons shifted slightly, moving from restraint positions to combat readiness. Zethkar saw the change in their stance, the hardening of their expressions. They would follow orders, just as he had done for 30 years. They would do their duty as they understood it, never questioning the system they served. "I'm sorry," Zethkar whispered, and opened fire. The plasma bolts lit up the chamber like deadly lightning, scorching the walls and shattering several of the human containment tanks. Zethkar moved with the fluid grace of a warrior who had survived countless battles, rolling behind a bank of laboratory equipment as return fire blazed over his head. The acrid smell of ozone and burning crystal filled the air. "Captain, please." Sergeant Craven called out between bursts of weapons fire. "We don't want to kill you, but we have our orders." Zethkar's heart ached as he recognized the voices of soldiers he had trained himself. These were good beings, loyal and brave, who had no idea they were fighting to protect a system of unimaginable cruelty. But explanation was impossible now. Imperial indoctrination ran too deep, and their conditioning wouldn't allow them to question direct orders from high command. Using his intimate knowledge of the palace's systems, Zethkar accessed the chamber's environmental controls through his armor's interface. Emergency lighting shut down, plunging the vast space into darkness. Only the soft glow from the remaining human tanks provided illumination, casting eerie shadows that danced across the walls. His enhanced vision gave him an advantage in the darkness, allowing him to move between the rows of tanks while the other soldiers fumbled with night vision equipment. But his advantage was temporary. They would adapt quickly, and more reinforcements were certainly on their way. As he moved through the maze of tanks and equipment, Zethkar caught glimpses of the humans floating in their crystalline prisons. Their peaceful expressions seemed obscene in the context of what he now knew about their situation. These beings had once been a proud species with their own civilization, their own dreams and hopes. Now, they existed as property of an empire that saw them as nothing more than useful tools. One tank had been damaged by stray weapons fire, its crystal walls cracked and leaking the biofluid that kept its occupant alive. The human inside was a young woman, perhaps 20 years old by his rough estimate. Dark hair framed a face that would have been considered beautiful by any species standards. But it was her expression that stopped Zethkar cold. Her eyes were open, looking directly at him through the failing containment system. She was awake, aware, and utterly terrified. Zethkar made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Instead of continuing his tactical withdrawal, he moved to the damaged tank and began working to free the trapped human. His claws weren't designed for delicate work, but desperation gave him precision as he carefully widened the crack in the crystal. "Sir, we have thermal readings on the captain," one of the soldiers reported over his comm system. He stopped moving approximately 60 meters northeast of entry point. "All units converge on that position," came the reply from General Thaxmore. "Remember, he's been compromised. Don't let sentiment interfere with your duty." The woman's eyes followed Zethkar's movements as he worked to free her. When the opening was wide enough, she pushed herself through and collapsed onto the floor, coughing up biofluid and gasping for air. Zethkar caught her before she could fall, surprised by how light she felt despite her adult proportions. "Can you understand me?" he whispered in the standard Imperial tongue. She looked up at him with eyes that held intelligence far beyond what Imperial propaganda claimed humans possessed. When she spoke, her voice was weak but clear. "Please, the others, they're going to wake up soon." Zethkar's blood turned to ice. "What do you mean?" "The evacuation protocol," she gasped, pointing to a flashing display panel he hadn't noticed before. "They're going to transfer everyone to the deep storage facilities. We'll never see daylight again." Before Zethkar could respond, the lights suddenly blazed back to life. General Thaxmore himself stood in the doorway, flanked by a full squad of elite Imperial guards. The general was a Vorthak, a species known for their calculating intelligence and absolute loyalty to the Empire. His 6 eyes fixed on Zethkar with disappointment that felt like a physical blow. Captain Zethkar, you have violated your oath, betrayed your species, and endangered Imperial security, General Thaxmore stated with formal precision. By Imperial law, the penalty for these crimes is immediate execution. Zethkar carefully set the human woman behind a bank of equipment, keeping his body between her and the soldiers. General, you need to see what they're doing here. This isn't about Imperial security. It's about covering up crimes that have continued for centuries. I know exactly what this facility contains, General Thaxmore replied coldly. I helped design the security protocols that have kept it hidden. The Human Asset Program is one of the Empire's most valuable strategic resources. Strategic resources? Zethkar's voice rose in disbelief. These are sentient beings. They have the right to dash. They have whatever rights the Empire chooses to grant them. The general cut him off. And currently, they have a right to serve Imperial interests in whatever capacity we deem appropriate. Your sentimental attachment to these creatures is evidence of mental compromise. Zethkar heard a soft sound behind him and glanced back to see the human woman standing on unsteady legs. She had moved to another damaged tank and was working to free its occupant, a human male who was beginning to stir in the failing biofluid. Her courage in the face of overwhelming danger reminded him of the reports he had read about human determination. Sir, one of the soldiers called out, the damaged tanks are destabilizing. We're getting cascade failures throughout this section. General Thaxmore's expression darkened. Captain, your reckless use of weapons has endangered valuable Imperial assets. Stand aside, so we can begin emergency preservation procedures. No, Zethkar said simply. The single word seemed to echo through the vast chamber. For 30 years, Zethkar had never disobeyed a direct order from a superior officer. His military record was spotless, his loyalty beyond question. But that loyalty had been based on the belief that he was serving something worthy of his sacrifice. Captain, you are suffering from acute psychological breakdown. General Thaxmore diagnosed with clinical detachment. Report for immediate medical intervention, and your service record will show you died honorably in the line of duty. Continue this rebellion, and you will be executed as a traitor. Behind Zethkar, more humans were emerging from failing tanks as the cascade failure spread through the containment systems. They moved with surprising coordination for beings who had been unconscious moments before, helping each other stand and looking around with alert, intelligent eyes. Whatever Imperial propaganda claimed about human mental capacity, these beings were clearly far more capable than advertised. General, how many species have we destroyed in the name of Imperial expansion? Zethkar asked. How many civilizations have we wiped out while claiming it was for the greater good? Every species the Empire has conquered has benefited from our guidance. General Thaxmore replied automatically. Primitive civilizations require direction from their superiors to reach their full potential. And if they refuse that guidance, then they demonstrate their unfitness to survive in a civilized galaxy. Zethkar felt something he had never experienced before in 3 decades of military service. For the first time in his life, he was ashamed of the uniform he wore, ashamed of the empire he had served, ashamed of the role he had played in perpetuating systematic oppression. One of the freed humans, the young woman who had first spoken to him, stepped forward despite her obvious weakness. You're arguing about us like we're not even here, she said in accented but clear Imperial standard. Like we're things instead of people. General Thaxmore's 6 eyes focused on her, with the interest a scientist might show in a particularly clever laboratory animal. Fascinating. This specimen shows unusual linguistic capability. Make a note to preserve her for advanced neural mapping before termination. Her name is Sarah, the human male who had been freed second interjected. And she's not a specimen. None of us are. Zethkar started in surprise. How did these humans know each other's names? According to Imperial records, they had been in stasis for years, possibly decades. They shouldn't have had any opportunity to develop relationships or maintain personal identities. General, he said slowly, how long have these humans been aware? The answer came not from General Thaxmore, but from Sarah herself. Long enough to know what you've been doing to us. long enough to plan. The lights in the chamber suddenly shifted to emergency red. Alarm klaxons began wailing throughout the complex as automated systems detected massive instability in the containment networks. But Zethkar realized this wasn't an accident. The cascade failure was spreading too quickly, too systematically to be random equipment malfunction. Sir, we're reading total system failure throughout levels 7 through 12. One of the technicians reported over the comm system. It looks like a coordinated breach of containment protocols. General Thaxmore's expression shifted from annoyance to alarm as the implications became clear. How many humans are we talking about? Estimated 47,000 subjects across all facilities, sir. They're all waking up simultaneously. 47,000. Zethkar tried to process the number as more humans emerged from the failing tanks around him. They moved with purpose despite their obvious disorientation, helping weaker individuals and organizing themselves with military-like efficiency. Their eyes held a fierce determination that made his scales crawl with premonition. This is impossible, General Thaxmore muttered. The stasis systems are completely isolated. There's no way they could have coordinated a simultaneous awakening. Sarah smiled, and there was nothing primitive or helpless in her expression. You're right. We couldn't have done it from inside the tanks. But we had help from someone who could access your systems from the outside. The chamber's communication system crackled to life, but instead of General Thaxmore's voice, a new speaker emerged. The voice was distinctly human, male, and carried the authority of someone accustomed to command. Attention all Imperial forces in the lower levels. This is Colonel Marcus Chun, formerly of the Human Defense Corps, currently serving as Liberation Coordinator for Operation Prometheus Rising. You are currently surrounded by over 40,000 awakened human personnel with complete knowledge of your facility's layout, weaknesses, and strategic value. Zethkar saw General Thaxmore's face cycle through several shades of color as the implications hit him. The Empire had been keeping humans as strategic assets for centuries, but they had made a critical error. They had assumed their prisoners remained the primitive beings described in historical records. Instead, they had been creating and training the most dangerous enemy imaginable. Ow! General Thaxmore whispered. Colonel Chin's voice continued over the communication system. You've been systematically selecting humans for intelligence, adaptability, and determination for over 1,000 years. Then, you gave us centuries to observe your technology, study your tactics, and learn your weaknesses. Did you really think we would just sleep forever? Around the chamber, Zethkar could see more humans emerging from the shadows. They had somehow obtained Imperial weapons and armor, though he couldn't imagine how. Their movements showed military training that supposedly primitive beings shouldn't possess. Impossible, one of the Imperial soldiers said. Humans don't have the cognitive capacity for complex tactical planning. Sarah laughed, and the sound held no humor. That's what we wanted you to think. Every time you tested us, we made sure to perform just well enough to be useful, but not well enough to be threatening. We've been planning this day since the first human was taken prisoner. The tactical situation was becoming clear to Zethkar's military mind. The humans had somehow gained access to Imperial systems and used that access to coordinate a massive simultaneous awakening. They had armed themselves with captured weapons and were now in control of the lower levels. But more importantly, they had been preparing for this moment for generations. General Thaxmore activated his emergency communicator. Command Center, this is General Thaxmore. We have a code black situation in the lower levels. Initiate immediate lockdown and prepare for orbital bombardment of compromised sections. Sir, came the reply, we cannot establish communication with orbital defense platforms. All our command codes have been changed. Sarah's smile widened. We told you we had help from the outside. Did you think we only had people down here? The realization hit Zethkar like a physical blow. The humans hadn't just been planning a prison break. They had been organizing a complete revolution. While the Empire believed them to be helpless prisoners, they had somehow infiltrated Imperial systems at the highest levels. How many of you are there? He asked quietly. Enough, Sarah replied. We've been preparing for this day for 30 generations. Every human you've used for infiltration missions, every hybrid soldier you've created, every test subject you thought was broken, they've all been working toward this moment. Colonel Chen's voice returned to the communication system. General Thaxmore, you and your forces have exactly 10 minutes to surrender unconditionally. After that time, we will consider you enemy combatants and act accordingly. You're bluffing, General Thaxmore snarled. Even if you've managed to wake up every human in this facility, you're still outnumbered by the entire Imperial fleet. You cannot possibly hope to dash. His words were cut off as every display screen in the chamber activated simultaneously. They showed images from across the galaxy, Imperial facilities burning, ships drifting powerless in space, planetary defense networks offline. On each screen, the same message appeared in multiple languages. The Terran Confederacy has returned. Zethkar stared at the screens in growing horror as he realized the scope of what was happening. This wasn't just a prison break or even a rebellion. It was the resurrection of an entire civilization that the Empire had believed destroyed. The humans had used their captivity to infiltrate every level of Imperial society, gathering intelligence and resources for a coordinated strike that was happening across dozens of star systems simultaneously. You see, General, Sarah said softly, you made one critical mistake. You assumed that because you could capture our bodies, you had defeated our spirits. But humans have a saying, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. You didn't kill us. You just gave us 1,000 years to get stronger. General Thaxmore raised his weapon, his 6 eyes blazing with fury. Even if this is true, even if your species has somehow survived and planned this rebellion, you will not leave this chamber alive. I will not allow you to escape and spread your poison throughout the galaxy. That's where you're wrong, said a new voice from behind the Imperial soldiers. They spun around to find Zethkar, pointing his weapon not at the humans, but at his former comrades. Captain, what are you doing? Sergeant Craven asked in disbelief. Zethkar met the eyes of each soldier in turn, seeing confusion and betrayal in their faces. These were good beings who had trusted him with their lives countless times. But they were also products of a system that had turned them into instruments of oppression. I'm doing what I should have done 30 years ago, he said quietly. I'm choosing to protect the innocent instead of their oppressors. The standoff in the chamber stretched like a taut wire ready to snap. Zethkar kept his weapon trained on General Thaxmore, while the other Imperial soldiers aimed at him, creating a deadly triangle of potential violence. The newly awakened humans had scattered throughout the laboratory, some still weak from their forced slumber, but others moving with increasing confidence as they recovered. Captain, General Thaxmore said with forced calm, you are making a mistake that will cost billions of lives. These creatures may appear harmless now, but they are a contamination that will spread throughout the galaxy if not contained. Their very existence threatens the stability of civilized space. Sarah stepped forward despite the weapons pointed in every direction. Contamination? Is that what you call a species that refuses to be enslaved? You don't understand the greater picture, the general continued, his 6 eyes never leaving Zethkar's face. Humanity was conquered because they were a threat to galactic peace. Left unchecked, they would have consumed every resource, destroyed every ecosystem, and conquered every species they encountered. The Empire saved countless worlds from human expansion. Zethkar found himself listening to words he had heard variations of throughout his military career. The Empire's expansion was always justified as protection, its conquest described as liberation, its victims portrayed as threats that had to be eliminated for the greater good. But now, surrounded by the evidence of centuries of systematic oppression, the familiar rhetoric sounded hollow. If humans were such a threat, he asked slowly, why keep them alive? Why not simply execute every prisoner and be done with it? General Thaxmore's hesitation lasted only a moment, but it was enough to confirm Zethkar's growing suspicions. Strategic intelligence gathering required live specimens. For 1,000 years, Sarah's voice carried a bitter edge. You've been studying us for longer than most species have had recorded history. If all you wanted was intelligence, you could have learned everything about us in a few decades. Colonel Chen's voice returned to the communication system, answering questions they hadn't asked. The truth, General, is that the Empire discovered early in their conquest of humanity that we possessed capabilities they desperately wanted to understand and exploit. Human creativity, adaptability, and determination were far beyond anything they had encountered before. On the display screens around the chamber, new images began appearing. They showed imperial military operations throughout history, impossible victories against overwhelming odds, breakthrough technologies developed in record time, infiltration missions that succeeded where other species had failed. In each case, careful analysis revealed human fingerprints on the achievements. Every major imperial victory for the past 8 centuries involved human assets, Colonel Chun continued. Your greatest military minds were human hybrids. Your most advanced technologies were developed by human scientists working under assumed identities. Your most successful espionage operations were carried out by humans who believed they were serving the Empire willingly. Zethkar felt the pieces of a vast puzzle clicking into place. His own promotion to Royal Guard Captain suddenly seemed less like recognition of his abilities and more like positioning him where human intelligence assets could observe Imperial leadership. How many of the Empire's successes had actually been human achievements disguised as alien accomplishments? Impossible, General Thaxmore snarled. Humans lack the cognitive sophistication for such complex deceptions. Sarah moved to one of the laboratory terminals and began accessing files with practiced ease. Computer, display psychological evaluation files for subjects designated Human Asset Integration Program. The screens around the chamber filled with detailed analyses of human test subjects who had been integrated into Imperial society. The reports described beings of extraordinary intelligence and capability who had been conditioned to believe they were members of other species. They had risen to positions of authority throughout the Empire, unknowingly serving human interests while believing they were loyal Imperial citizens. My God, Zethkar whispered as he read the files. How many? Conservative estimate? Sarah replied. About 30% of the Empire's senior leadership positions are filled by humans who don't know they're human. Another 20% are held by beings who are collaborating with us knowingly. The Empire you've been serving for 30 years has been controlled by the species it claims to have conquered. The implications were staggering. For centuries, the Empire had believed itself to be the dominant power in the galaxy, while actually serving as an unwitting tool of human expansion. Every conquest had been planned and executed according to strategies developed by the very species the Empire thought it had enslaved. One of the Imperial soldiers, a young Krillian like Zethkar himself, lowered his weapon with a confused expression. Sir, if this is true, then what have we been fighting for? Lies, General Thaxmore roared. Propaganda designed to weaken your resolve. These creatures are master manipulators who will say anything to avoid the consequences of their rebellion. But doubt had taken root in the minds of the Imperial forces. Zethkar could see it in their postures, hear it in their voices as they whispered questions to each other. Military personnel were trained to recognize deception, and the evidence surrounding them was becoming impossible to dismiss. Colonel Chen's voice cut through their confusion with military precision. All Imperial personnel in the facility, this is your final opportunity to surrender. We have no desire to harm beings who have been deceived by their leadership. Lay down your weapons and submit to debriefing, and you will be treated with the dignity that sentient beings deserve. Never. General Thaxmore raised his weapon toward Sarah, his finger tightening on the trigger. Zethkar's military reflexes saved the human woman's life. His plasma bolt caught the general in the shoulder, spinning him around and sending his weapon clattering across the floor. The other soldiers froze in shock as their commanding officer collapsed, clutching his wounded arm. Sergeant Craven, Zethkar called out to his former subordinate. Order all personnel to stand down. We need time to process what we've learned. The sergeant looked from Zethkar to the wounded general to the humans surrounding them. His military training warred with the evidence of his senses until finally he made his decision. All units, weapons down. We're standing down pending clarification of the tactical situation. As the immediate threat of violence receded, more humans emerged from the shadows of the laboratory complex. They moved with quiet efficiency, securing abandoned weapons and tending to those who were still recovering from their forced awakening. Zethkar was struck by their organization. These weren't panicked prisoners seizing a chance at freedom, but disciplined personnel executing a carefully planned operation. Sarah approached Zethkar, her expression no longer hostile but still wary. Thank you for choosing to help us. I know it couldn't have been easy to turn against your own people. Are they my people? Zethkar asked quietly. I've spent my entire adult life serving an empire I believed represented justice and order. If what you've shown me is true, then I've been nothing more than a tool of oppression. You've been lied to, she replied simply. Just like billions of other beings throughout the galaxy. The Empire's greatest achievement has been convincing its victims that their suffering serves a greater purpose. On the screens around them, reports continued to stream in from across Imperial space. Planetary defense networks were falling silent, military installations were being seized by their own personnel, and government officials were disappearing from their posts. The scope of the human operation was becoming clear. This wasn't just a prison break. It was the systematic dismantling of Imperial authority throughout known space. General Thaxmore struggled to his feet, his wounded arm hanging useless at his side. Even if you succeed in destroying the Empire, he snarled, chaos will follow. Hundreds of species will turn on each other without Imperial mediation. Billions will die in the wars that follow. You're probably right, Sarah admitted. Removing a 1,000-year-old system of oppression will create massive instability. But that instability will be temporary. The oppression was permanent. Colonel Chen's voice returned to the communication system. All units, we're receiving surrender communications from Imperial facilities throughout the sector. Phase 1 of Operation Prometheus Rising is complete. Begin Phase 2 preparations. Zethkar felt a chill run through his scales. What's Phase 2? Sarah's expression grew somber. Education. Every being in Imperial space is going to learn the true history of their civilization. They're going to discover how many of their achievements were built on the suffering of conquered peoples. They're going to understand what their governments have done in their names. And then they'll have to decide what kind of galaxy they want to live in. The screens around the chamber shifted to show broadcast signals reaching every inhabited world in Imperial space. The signals carried historical records, personal testimonies from survivors of Imperial conquest, and detailed documentation of atrocities committed across centuries. Beings throughout the galaxy would soon learn that their prosperity had been built on systematic exploitation of other species. This will destroy your empire just as surely as military conquest, General Thaxmore observed. When your people learn the truth, they'll lose faith in every institution that has guided their civilization. Good, Sarah replied. Institutions built on lies and exploitation deserve to fall. What replaces them will be built on truth and consent. But Zethkar could see the challenge in her words. Destroying existing systems was the easy part. Building better ones would require the cooperation of dozens of species who had been enemies for generations. How could humans hope to unite beings who have been taught to fear and hate each other? As if reading his thoughts, Colonel Chen's voice provided answers. To all beings receiving this transmission, the Terran Confederacy extends an invitation to participate in the formation of a new galactic government. This government will be based on the principles of consent, equality, and mutual cooperation between all sentient species. Representatives from every world will be given the opportunity to participate in constitutional conventions that will establish the framework for a truly representative democracy. No species will be compelled to join, but all will be welcome to contribute to the creation of a government that serves all beings rather than exploiting them. Zethkar found himself wondering if such an ambitious goal was even possible. The galaxy contained hundreds of species with radically different biologies, psychologies, and cultural values. How could beings so different possibly agree on shared principles of governance? Sarah seemed to sense his skepticism. It won't be easy, she acknowledged. There will be conflicts, misunderstandings, and setbacks. Some species will refuse to participate. Others will try to recreate the old system under new names. But for the first time in galactic history, every being will have the choice to shape their own destiny. And if they choose wrong, General Thaxmore challenged. If democracy leads to chaos and war, then we'll learn from our mistakes and try again, Sarah replied. But at least we'll be making our own mistakes instead of living with someone else's deliberate cruelties. The communication system crackled with a new voice, female, speaking with the authority of someone accustomed to command. This is Admiral Rebecca Torres of the Terran Confederacy Fleet. All Imperial vessels in this system have surrendered and are being escorted to designated coordinates for crew debriefing. Imperial planetary defenses have been disabled and are under Confederacy control. Admiral Torres. Zethkar recognized the name from Imperial military records. She had supposedly been killed in action 3 years ago while serving as a loyal Imperial officer. How many other dead humans were now revealing themselves as leaders of this rebellion? The Emperor himself, Zethkar, said suddenly. What happens to him? Sarah and Colonel Chun exchanged glances before Sarah answered. Emperor Vaxthul died of natural causes 6 months ago. His death was concealed by the Imperial Council while they fought over succession. The being who has been issuing imperial edicts since then is actually a human agent named David Kim, who has been serving as the Emperor's trusted advisor for the past decade. The revelation hit Zethkar like a physical blow. For 6 months, he had been taking orders from a human pretending to be an alien, pretending to be Emperor. The empire he had served with absolute loyalty had been dead longer than he had realized. General Faxmore's remaining composure cracked completely. Impossible. I've known Emperor Vaxthul for 20 years. I've spoken with him personally dozens of times. You've spoken with David Kim dozens of times, Sarah corrected. Who do you think recommended you for your current position? Who suggested that Captain Zethkar be promoted to Royal Guard? Who ensured that loyal soldiers like yourselves would be positioned to witness the truth when the time came for revelation? The pieces fell into place with terrible clarity. Zethkar's entire career had been guided by human agents working to position him exactly where they needed him. His loyalty, his skill, his dedication, all had been exploited to serve a plan he had never imagined existed. Why? He asked quietly. Why go to such elaborate lengths? You could have simply assassinated imperial leadership and seized control directly. Because that would have made us conquerors instead of liberators, Sarah replied. We want to give every being the chance to choose their own path, not force our will upon them. The elaborate deception was necessary to dismantle the system from within rather than destroying it from without. Around the chamber, imperial soldiers were laying down their weapons and removing their helmets. Freed from the immediate threat of combat, they were beginning to ask questions, to examine the evidence, to process the magnitude of what they had discovered. Zethkar could see the same mixture of confusion, anger, and betrayal in their faces that he felt in his own heart. Colonel Chin's voice returned to address them directly. Imperial personnel, you have a choice to make. You can attempt to maintain the old system and spend your lives fighting a war you cannot win against an enemy that already controls the government you serve. Or you can help us build something better. We're offering full amnesty to any being who agrees to participate in the transition to democratic government. Your experience and expertise will be invaluable in maintaining stability during the changeover. But the choice must be yours, made freely and without coercion. Zethkar looked around the chamber at the evidence of imperial crimes, at the humans who had endured centuries of captivity, at the soldiers who had served their oppressors unknowingly. The weight of 30 years of loyal service to a system built on lies pressed down on him like a physical burden. But within that weight, he found something unexpected. For the first time in his adult life, he had the opportunity to choose what he stood for instead of simply following orders. The Empire had given him purpose, structure, and identity, but it had never given him choice. I'll help, he said simply. The words felt strange on his tongue, like speaking in a foreign language. But they also felt right in a way that 30 years of military service never had. General Faxmore stared at him with undisguised contempt. Traitor. No, Zethkar replied, surprising himself with the certainty in his voice. For the first time in my life, I'm being loyal to something worthy of loyalty. 3 months after the revelation in the laboratory, Zethkar stood on the observation deck of Harmony Station, watching shuttles arrive from across the galaxy. Each vessel carried representatives from worlds that had been part of the Empire, species that had been enemies for generations, now coming together to participate in the first Galactic Constitutional Convention. The transformation had been swift, but not without cost. As Sarah had predicted, the collapse of Imperial authority had led to chaos on many worlds. Some species had attempted to recreate the Empire under their own leadership, leading to brief but violent conflicts. Others had retreated into isolation, refusing to trust any form of interspecies cooperation. A few had embraced anarchy, rejecting all forms of government entirely. But most had chosen to participate in the great experiment of galactic democracy. The promise of self-determination had proven more powerful than the fear of change, and delegates were arriving daily to begin the complex work of creating a new system of governance. Zethkar wore civilian clothes now, a simple gray uniform that bore no marks of rank or authority. His role in the new order was that of a facilitator, using his knowledge of Imperial military structure to help coordinate the peaceful transition of former Imperial forces. It was strange work for someone who had spent his entire adult life following orders, but he found it surprisingly fulfilling. "Captain, we have a situation developing in Conference Room 7, came a voice over his communicator. It was Sarah, who had become the unofficial liaison between human leadership and other species. "The Vorthack delegation is threatening to walk out over the voting structure proposals." Zethkar sighed and made his way through the station's corridors. 3 months of negotiations had taught him that the hardest part of building a democracy wasn't establishing principles. It was getting dozens of species with different biological capabilities and social structures to agree on practical implementation details. Conference Room 7 buzzed with agitated voices speaking in multiple languages. The Vorthack delegation, led by a female named Sikithra, stood at one end of the table with their bags packed. Across from them sat representatives from smaller species who had been advocating for population-based representation. "The proposed system is unacceptable," Sikithra was saying in her species' characteristic monotone. "It would reduce Vorthack political influence to negligible levels despite our technological and intellectual contributions to galactic civilization. Your technological contributions were built on resources stolen from conquered worlds," replied Gentai of the Miri delegation. "Why should past exploitation grant you disproportionate political power in a system designed to prevent future exploitation?" Zethkar took his seat at the mediation table, a position he had occupied in dozens of similar disputes over the past months. "May I suggest we step back and examine the underlying concerns rather than the proposed solutions?" Both delegations turned to him with expressions ranging from frustration to barely controlled anger. Getting species to work together was proving even more difficult than the humans had anticipated. "The underlying concern," Thra stated flatly, "is that populous species will use democratic processes to subjugate less numerous but more advanced peoples. Democracy is merely mob rule disguised as justice. And our concern," Gentai countered, "is that advanced species will use claims of superiority to justify continued domination of others. Intellectual elitism is just imperialism with better vocabulary." Zethkar had heard variations of this argument countless times. The challenge of creating a truly representative democracy when different species had vastly different population sizes, lifespans, and cognitive capabilities seemed almost insurmountable. "What if we approach this differently?" he suggested. "Instead of trying to balance power between species, what if we focus on protecting individual rights regardless of species membership?" Sarah entered the conference room carrying a data pad with the latest proposal from the Human Constitutional Committee. "Actually, we might have a solution that addresses both concerns. The humans have been analyzing democratic systems from throughout their history, including some that might work for multi-species governance." She activated the room's holographic display, showing a complex structure of interconnected governmental bodies. "This is based on something called a constitutional republic with federated representation. Each world gets to choose its own local government structure, but all worlds agree to abide by certain fundamental principles regarding individual rights and inter-world cooperation." The display showed how local issues would be handled by planetary governments while galactic concerns would be managed by representatives chosen according to each world's own selection methods. Some worlds might choose direct democracy, others might prefer council systems, and still others might maintain traditional hierarchies, as long as they respected the basic rights of their citizens and fulfilled their obligations to the broader Confederation. "The key innovation," Sarah continued, "is that representation in the galactic government isn't based solely on population or technological advancement, but on a combination of factors including population, resource contribution, and successful democratic participation." S.E. Kathra studied the proposal with her characteristic methodical approach. This system would require a mechanism for verifying compliance with democratic principles. Who would serve as such arbiters? "Rotating oversight committees chosen by lottery from qualified representatives of all member worlds," Sarah replied. "No single species or group of species would have permanent oversight authority." Gentai frowned as she processed the implications. "And what happens to worlds that refuse to participate in the Confederation? Are they compelled to join?" "No compulsión se garantir." But non-member worlds wouldn't have access to Confederation trade networks, defense agreements, or technological sharing programs. They're free to remain independent, but they don't get the benefits of cooperation without contributing to it. For the next several hours, the delegations worked through the details of the proposed system, raising objections, suggesting modifications, and gradually building a framework that both groups could accept. It was exhausting work that required patience, creativity, and willingness to compromise on all sides. As the session ended with tentative agreement to move forward with further negotiations, Zethkar reflected on how different this process was from imperial governance. Under the Empire, such disagreements would have been resolved by decree from higher authority, with dissenters facing punishment for questioning established policy. This messy, time-consuming democratic process was far less efficient, but it was also far more just. Later that evening, Zethkar joined Sarah and Colonel Chun for dinner in the station's civilian quarters. The informal meal had become a daily tradition, allowing them to process the day's progress and plan for upcoming challenges. "How are our former Imperial colleagues adapting to their new roles?" Colonel Chin asked as they shared a meal of foods from multiple worlds. "Better than expected," Zethkar replied. "Most are genuinely relieved to discover that their service can have positive outcomes instead of perpetuating oppression. But some are struggling with the loss of certainty that came with following orders." Sarah nodded thoughtfully. "That's understandable. The Empire provided clear hierarchies and simple moral frameworks. Democracy requires people to think for themselves and make difficult choices without clear guidance." Speaking of difficult choices, Colonel Chan said, "We've received a communication from the Terran High Council. They want to know if you're interested in accepting appointment as the first director of interspecies relations." Zethkar nearly choked on his food. "Me? But I'm not human. Why would your people want an alien in such a critical position?" "Because you're not human," Sarah replied with a smile. "Having a non-human in that role sends a clear message that this new government belongs to all species, not just the ones who led the revolution. Besides," Colonel Chin added, "you've proven yourself capable of thinking beyond species loyalties. That's exactly what we need in someone responsible for helping different peoples work together." The offer was tempting, but Zethkar had learned to examine his motivations carefully. "Are you sure this isn't just another form of manipulation? Using my guilt over past service to ensure my cooperation with human objectives?" "It might be," Sarah admitted with characteristic honesty. "We're still learning how to build genuine partnerships instead of just more sophisticated forms of control. But the offer is real, and the choice is entirely yours." That night, Zethkar walked alone through the station's observation areas, watching the stars and thinking about the path that had led him from loyal Imperial soldier to democratic facilitator. The journey had been painful, forcing him to confront uncomfortable truths about his past service and the system he had supported. But it had also been liberating in ways he was still discovering. A message from General Thaxmore interrupted his contemplation. The general had refused all offers of cooperation and remained in detention, but he was permitted to send communications to former subordinates who might be willing to listen. "Captain Zethkar," the message began with formal military precision, "I hope you will reconsider your collaboration with these terrorists before it's too late. The chaos they have unleashed will destroy everything our civilization has built. When order finally collapses and beings turn to violence to resolve their differences, you will bear responsibility for the suffering that follows. The Empire may have had flaws, but it provided stability for billions of beings across hundreds of worlds. This experiment in democracy will fail because most species lack the cognitive sophistication necessary for effective self-governance. You are enabling the destruction of galactic civilization." Zethkar composed his response carefully, knowing it might be the last communication he ever had with his former commanding officer. "General Thaxmore, I understand your concerns about stability and order. For 30 years, I shared those same fears. But I have learned that stability built on oppression is not peace. It is merely the temporary absence of visible resistance. The beings I work with daily in these negotiations are demonstrating cognitive sophistication and moral courage that our imperial education never acknowledged. They are choosing to engage in difficult, messy democratic processes instead of reverting to the authoritarian simplicity we once provided. Yes, there will be failures and setbacks. Democracy is harder than dictatorship. But the beings of this galaxy have chosen difficulty over oppression, uncertainty over subjugation. I cannot help but admire their courage. As he sent the message, Zethkar realized he had found his answer to Colonel Chen's offer. He would accept the position not because he felt guilty about his past, but because he genuinely believed in the future these beings were trying to build. The next morning brought news that would test that belief. The hegemony of Krell, one of the Empire's most powerful successor states, had declared war on the emerging Confederation. They claimed that human manipulation of democratic processes was merely a more sophisticated form of conquest, and they intended to restore proper order to the galaxy. The Krellian fleet was already moving toward Confederate territory, and advanced scouts reported massive military buildups on worlds throughout their space. The peaceful transition to democracy was about to face its first major military challenge. Sarah found Zethkar in his quarters as he prepared to accept the appointment as Director of Interspecies Relations. "Are you having second thoughts?" she asked. "Actually, no," he replied, surprising himself with his certainty. The Krellians are wrong about human manipulation, but they're not wrong about the challenges we face. Building a democracy that works for dozens of species will require constant effort and vigilance. Someone needs to help coordinate that effort, even if it means potentially going to war with your own species' government. Zethkar paused in his preparations. The hegemony of Krell was led primarily by Krillians like himself, beings who shared his biological heritage even if they didn't share his political evolution. Fighting against them would mean abandoning not just his former loyalties, but his species' identity as well. "My species," he said finally, "is not defined by the government that claims to represent us. There are Krillians throughout Confederate space who have chosen democracy over domination. They're my people now, regardless of what biology we happen to share." The decision felt right in ways that 30 years of Imperial service never had. For the first time in his life, Zethkar was choosing his own identity instead of accepting the one assigned to him by accident of birth. Sarah smiled and extended her hand in the human gesture of cooperation. "Welcome to the hardest job in the galaxy, Director Zethkar." He shook her hand, sealing his commitment to a future he couldn't predict but believed was worth fighting for. Outside the station's windows, the first ships of the Krellian advance force appeared as distant points of light against the stars. The real test of galactic democracy was about to begin. The war room aboard the Confederate flagship Resilience hummed with activity as representatives from 43 species worked together to coordinate the defense of their fragile new democracy. Director Zethkar stood at the central holographic display, watching real-time updates as the Krellian hegemony's massive fleet advanced through Confederate space. 6 months had passed since the Constitutional Convention, and the new government was still learning to function under the pressure of its first major crisis. The irony wasn't lost on Zethkar that humanity's greatest gift to the galaxy, the chance for genuine self-determination, was now being threatened by the very species that had once been his own. Latest intelligence reports indicate the hegemony has mobilized over 2,000 capital ships, reported Admiral Torres, her human features betraying none of the strain she must be feeling. They've been building this fleet in secret for months, probably since before the Empire fell. "What about their demands?" asked Delegate Morshin of the Aquatic Collective, her translator converting her sonar-based language into Standard Galactic. "Are they still insisting on our unconditional surrender?" Admiral Torres nodded grimly. Hegemon Kralvex claims that democracy is a human plot to weaken other species through internal division. He's offering to liberate any world that abandons the Confederation and submits to hegemony authority. Zethkar studied the tactical displays showing Krellian fleet movements. His former species had always been excellent military strategists, but their approach to this campaign puzzled him. Instead of striking swiftly at Confederate leadership, they were advancing slowly and making elaborate propaganda broadcasts to every system they approached. They're not trying to win a quick military victory, he realized aloud. They're trying to prove that democracy doesn't work under pressure. Sarah, now serving as civilian coordinator for war effort logistics, looked up from her own datapad. "What do you mean?" "Look at their targets." Zethkar gestured to the holographic display. "They're not attacking our strongest defensive positions or most important strategic assets. They're hitting worlds with large populations of multiple species, places where our democratic processes are most complex and time-consuming." The implications became clear as he spoke. Every world the hegemony threatened would require extensive debate among its diverse population before deciding how to respond. Some species might favor negotiation, others might prefer evacuation, still others might want to fight regardless of the odds. The democratic process that was the Confederation's greatest strength could also become its greatest weakness when faced with an enemy that valued speed over consensus. Clever, Admiral Torres admitted. While we're debating the best response to each threat, they can pick off isolated worlds before we can organize effective resistance. So what do? Asked Delegate Vextar of the Silicon Brotherhood, his crystalline form refracting the holographic light into prismatic patterns. Abandon democracy for the duration of the emergency? Prove their point by becoming another military dictatorship. The question hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Every being in the room understood that democratic governments throughout history had faced this same dilemma. External threats often required rapid, decisive action that democratic processes couldn't provide quickly enough. Many democracies had solved the problem by temporarily becoming dictatorships, but very few had successfully transitioned back to democratic governance when the crisis ended. We don't abandon democracy, Sarah said firmly. We prove that free people can defend themselves more effectively than oppressed ones. With respect, Delegate Morshin replied, historical evidence suggests otherwise. Authoritarian systems are generally more efficient at mobilizing resources for warfare. In the short term, yes, Sarah acknowledged. But this isn't going to be a short war. The hegemony is trying to conquer 43 separate star systems inhabited by dozens of species who have tasted freedom. Even if they win military victories, they'll be fighting insurgencies for generations. Zethkar found himself thinking about the conversations he'd had with former Imperial soldiers over the past months. Many had expressed relief at being freed from the burden of enforcing policies they privately questioned. Others had struggled with a loss of clear hierarchies and simple moral frameworks. How would they respond when faced with the choice between easy authoritarianism and difficult democracy? We need to trust our people, he said slowly. Every world in the Confederation chose to join us voluntarily. They understand what they're fighting for better than anyone. Admiral Torres activated a new display showing the current defensive deployments. The problem is coordination. We have local defense forces on every world, but no centralized command structure. Each planet is essentially fighting alone. What if that's not a weakness? Sarah suggested. What if it's our greatest advantage? She moved to the holographic controls and began highlighting different systems. The hegemony is fighting like the old empire. Centralized command, standardized tactics, overwhelming force applied at specific points. But we're not the empire. We're dozens of different species with different capabilities, different technologies, and different ways of thinking about warfare. You're suggesting asymmetric resistance, Zethkar realized. Let each world fight according to its own strengths instead of trying to create a unified strategy. Exactly. The Aquatic Collective has developed underwater cities that no surface force could assault. The Silicon Brotherhood can create defensive networks in asteroid fields that would stop any conventional fleet. The Avian Confederacy has mastered three-dimensional orbital combat that most species can barely comprehend. Admiral Torres studied the proposal with professional interest. It could work, but only if we can maintain some form of overall coordination. Otherwise, the hegemony will defeat us in detail. That's where our democratic institutions become military assets, Sarah continued. Our communication networks, our diplomatic protocols, our habit of consultation and cooperation, all of that becomes intelligence gathering and tactical coordination. Over the following hours, the War Council developed a strategy that was unlike anything in galactic military history. Instead of trying to match the hegemony's centralized approach, they would embrace radical decentralization. Each world would fight according to its own capabilities while sharing intelligence and resources through the democratic networks they had already established. The first test of this strategy came when the hegemony attacked the Miri home system. Traditional military doctrine would have required the Confederate fleet to concentrate its forces for a decisive battle. Instead, Admiral Torres deployed her ships in small, mixed-species squadrons that could adapt their tactics to whatever local conditions they encountered. Zethkar watched the battle unfold from the Strategic Command Center, his heart pounding as he saw beings he had come to know personally putting their lives at risk for principles they had chosen freely. The Miri themselves fought from heavily fortified ground positions while their allies provided orbital support and harassment of hegemony supply lines. Interesting, observed Colonel Chun, who had been monitoring hegemony communications. Their fleet commanders are having trouble coordinating responses to our attacks. Each time they adapt to one squadron's tactics, another squadron hits them with something completely different. The battle raged for 3 days, but the outcome gradually became clear. The hegemony's superior numbers and firepower weren't enough to overcome the creative chaos of Confederate resistance. Every time they established a tactical pattern, their opponents changed the rules of engagement entirely. Hegemony forces are withdrawing from the Miri system. Admiral Torres reported with obvious satisfaction. They're regrouping at the system's edge, apparently waiting for new orders. Zethkar felt a mixture of relief and apprehension as he watched the Krellian fleet retreat. They had won their first major engagement, but he knew his former species well enough to recognize that this was just the beginning. They're learning, he warned the others. Krellians don't repeat the same mistake twice. They'll adapt their strategy to counter what we did here. Good, Sarah replied. Let them adapt. We'll adapt faster. The months that followed proved both of them right. The hegemony developed new tactics designed to counter Confederate asymmetric warfare, while Confederate forces continued to evolve in response to each new threat. But gradually, a pattern emerged that favored the democracy. The hegemony's adaptations were limited by their centralized command structure. New tactics had to be approved by military hierarchies, tested in controlled environments, and then distributed through formal channels. The process was thorough but slow. Confederate adaptations happened at the speed of conversation. A successful innovation on one world would spread to Allied forces within hours through the communication networks that kept democratic governance functioning. Local commanders could experiment with new approaches without waiting for approval from distant authorities. More importantly, the war was producing an unexpected side effect. The shared struggle was accelerating the integration of different species into a genuine galactic community. Beings who had been strangers 6 months ago were now fighting side by side, learning to trust each other with their lives. Look at this, Sarah said one day, showing Zethkar a report from the front lines. Mixed species crew performance ratings are consistently higher than single species crews. They're not just cooperating, they're becoming more effective by working together. The report showed tactical innovations that could only have emerged from the interaction of different types of intelligence. Krellian strategic thinking combined with Miri technical expertise and human adaptability was producing solutions that no single species could have developed alone. But the most significant development came from an unexpected source. Reports began arriving of defections from hegemony forces, not just individuals abandoning their posts, but entire units switching sides after contact with Confederate forces. They're seeing what we've built here, explained Commander Shulnex, a Krellian officer who had recently defected with his entire cruiser crew. For all the hegemony's talk about strength and order, their soldiers are dying for the ambitions of leaders who treat them as expendable assets. Here, every being matters. Zethkar interviewed dozens of defectors, trying to understand what had motivated their decisions. The answers were remarkably consistent across different species. They had joined the hegemony because they feared the chaos that might follow the Empire's fall, but they had switched sides because they discovered something worth fighting for rather than just something to fight against. The war's turning point came during the Battle of the Three Suns, when a massive hegemony offensive encountered a Confederate defense that included representatives from every member species. The battle itself was won through superior tactics and courage, but its real significance was symbolic. For the first time in galactic history, dozens of species had fought together as equals, each contributing their unique strengths to a common cause. The holographic recordings of the battle showed Krellian warriors fighting alongside their former enemies, human strategists coordinating with Silicon Brotherhood engineers, and aquatic collective forces providing support from environments where no other species could operate. Hegemon Kralvex himself appeared on Confederate communication networks after the battle, his image transmitted to every world in Confederate space. You have proven that your alliance can fight, he acknowledged. But can it govern? Can it survive the peace that will follow victory? It was a question that haunted Zethkar as the war gradually shifted in the Confederation's favor. Military cooperation was one thing. Beings could work together when facing an external threat. But could they maintain that cooperation when dealing with the mundane challenges of trade disputes, resource allocation, and cultural differences? The answer came during the negotiations that finally ended the war. Instead of demanding unconditional surrender or seeking revenge against the hegemony, the Confederate delegates offered something unprecedented: membership in the Confederation for any hegemony world that chose to join democratically. "We're not trying to conquer anyone," Sarah explained during the final negotiation session. "We're offering everyone the same choice we gave ourselves, the chance to determine their own future through democratic participation." Hegemon Kralvex listened to the offer with the stone-faced expression typical of his species. "And if we refuse? If we choose to maintain our independence under traditional leadership?" "Then you remain independent," Zethkar replied. "But you also remain alone. The benefits of Confederation membership, trade networks, technological sharing, mutual defense, are available only to those who contribute to the democratic process. You would isolate us economically? We would respect your choice to remain separate," Sarah clarified. "But we can't force other beings to trade with governments they consider illegitimate. Economic relationships,